Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your Kid Lit loving host, inviting you back for another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I am beyond excited and grateful and honored to welcome Kate DiCamillo to the podcast, an author that likely needs no introduction. She has written many beloved and what I call huggable books for children. Her books have earned her multiple awards, including the Newbery Medal and Honor Awards. And she was a national ambassador for young people's literature and continues to share her love of stories far and wide to young children and adults like me today. She's here to talk specifically about her newest book, Ferris. Kate, welcome to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I am so glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here. And, we don't have to just talk about Ferris. We can talk about anything and everything. So,
well, I'm very glad you said that because I have thought long and hard about how I might structure this podcast episode because we all know you and we all love you. And everyone already likely has a list of titles in their minds that have just been so important to them in their own reading life. And so I thought, I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to say, what would I want to talk to Kate DiCamillo about for a half an hour if I had her? And I do. So this is from my reader's heart to yours today. I'm so excited.
it's an honor. Thank you. Because that's exactly what I want to do is like, it's that connection.
Yes.
Over this powerful, powerful thing of story, So, okay, I'll follow your lead.
Okay. Well, I have held your books in my hands so many times. First, when I'm reading aloud to my students, when I was in the classroom, when I am pushing those books into their hands to read them themselves, again, when I'm reading to my own children, and, of course, even when I'm still reading them as an adult who loves them just as much. And the thing that always jumps out at me about your books is the timeless nature of them. It doesn't matter if I'm reading one of your books with kids 10 years ago or today or likely 10 years into the future. Time and place just seem to disappear as you connect with those characters and the reader just finds themselves inside the story. I find myself multiple times inside of your stories. And I just think that it's that experience that I think of the most when I think of interacting with a book from you. And I wonder, how the heck do you do that? How do you keep coming up with these ideas where we all just feel so seen in so many different ways?
I don't, it's always interesting to hear kind of like somebody's broad overview, like you just did, of my work, because it even sounds pretentious to say my work, but I've been doing this for a long time now, for gosh, almost 25 years, lucky me. And I don't understand what I'm doing. So anytime somebody talks about my work like you just did, it helps me understand it. And as you were saying all that, I thought, what I was thinking of is the books that I read as a kid, and how I, in order to tell these stories, I'm always accessing that 8-year-old, that 9-year-old, that 10-year-old in me. And so when you say timeless, it's more just me, like teleporting myself back to, um, those books that spoke to me when I was a kid, and does that make sense?
Yes.
So I don't know how I do what I do. I do know that I am addressing some deep longing in me that has existed since I was a kid, and that happily, gloriously, I still have access to,
Yeah.
and that's where the stories come from, and so maybe that's why they have that timeless quality. I don't know. You're nodding, which is
I
great,
am.
so maybe it makes sense to you. But I'm not the best person to talk about what I do because I don't understand it. I just know that that kid me and that deep longing for connection in that kid me and in the adult me is part of where the portal to the stories.
Yeah. And I'm nodding because it totally makes sense. And I think that's what readers can feel, right? We all have an inner child, right? Whether we are actually living in our inner child because we are 10 or we are 40 something and we are reading to our inner child in this moment. When when you can connect with the book in that way, in the most deepest sense of the character, and just feel like you know them, what's happening with them, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and connect with them on that level, that is the part I think that just, it doesn't matter when and where or how you're reading it. It's just you see each other. That I think is,
Yeah. And I was just going to say, as you were saying that, that you had said in your initial beautiful assessment of things that it, the stories make the reader feel seen. And to me, that is the highest compliment because that's what I experience as a reader with writing that moves me is you feel like somebody, you feel less alone, and you also feel like somebody understands your heart
yeah.
and you understand another heart better. So
Yes, and it's funny that you just said that because if we shift to talking a little bit about Ferris, in my review that I wrote, my very first line said that my heart grew bigger and bigger as I read this book.
oh,
That was exactly what happened with Ferris. It grew bigger for the amazingly delightful, quirky cast of characters, for the long list of words I collected in my notebook, but especially just the beauty of family, of friendship, and believing in others as much as you believe in yourself, vice
oh,
versa. Like I felt like the Grinch a little bit, like my heart bursting a couple of sizes too big. This book, if we jump into talking about Ferris, it's everything. It's beautiful. I loved
oh,
it.
oh, you're gonna make me cry. And because before a book comes out, we all get asked the question, what do you want a reader to take away from this? And what I want, I mean, I would never dare to dream with what you just said, but I just wanted for anybody, a kid, an adult, to feel welcomed in and part, like I wanted them to be at that table. And that's metaphorically what you just said. That's what makes your heart grow, right? To sit at the table with all of these people and feel seen and loved and filled with wonder, you know.
And that was one of my favorite scenes. I don't want to spoil things for
Yeah, no,
listeners,
I was being careful when I was talking about it too. Yeah, right. I
but
know.
you know the scene I'm talking about, and that was my favorite. And you mentioned, it's kind of a metaphoric and a figurative table, so to
Yes.
speak. And I recently read an interview that you did in Book Page where you said, I seem to just end up with everybody happy and eating and safe around a table.
I seem to always, and this is another thing of, like talking to other people, good readers about, my books is just like it's taken me a long time to see that. But I am working to that moment in everything that I tell. It's just like I want to get everybody safe around a, in a well lit room, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. The well-lit room, and we won't say anything more than
No, we won't. Yeah.
I do have a funny kind of a funny thing to tell you about too. I think the first time I saw myself in the story, or I saw myself in Ferris. Ferris is just this amazing character who has the biggest, kindest heart and wants to do good and be good and help. And she's doing a favor for her uncle, who is this wonderfully quirky character. And so off she goes to talk to her Aunt Shirley in an effort to help patch some things up. And the process ends up with this most unfortunate perm. And I'm not really spoiling much. I'm not spoiling much, but I need to talk about this section. She ends up with this most unfortunate perm that later on round 2 of trying to help her uncle ends up turning into this most unfortunate haircut. And in that moment, I kind of stopped and I put the book down because when I'm blocking the age out, it was either 9 or 10 or 11. I also had a most unfortunate perm. And in the 80s, when you have a most unfortunate perm, your young mom just cuts your ears out and feathers everything to fix it up. And I thought, oh my goodness, I am reliving that moment of my childhood with Ferris. How she handled it.
All the interviews that I've done about this book, this is the first time I've gotten to talk about
Oh,
yeah. And it was, it's a big part of my experience of growing up too. And just that kind of like that. I mean, this is particularly profound with Aunt Shirley, but just like in general, you get into that chair in the beauty salon and you're out of control, right? You're just a little kid and you don't know, and then, you get twirled around and there you are. And it's like, oh no. And
yes,
you never speak up when it's happening, So
that is
it's
correct.
just like, that's so funny that you would bring that up because I haven't gotten to talk about that at all, but that is a childhood memory for me too. So
That was my question of
yeah.
it is a piece of you, because I know, there are pieces of every writer in all of their books. And I wondered the pieces of yourself that were scattered throughout Ferris. So the
That
hair
is
is one of them.
definitely one of them. And that thing too of just like, because you're right. She's, she goes to see Aunt Shirley in the service of Uncle Ted. And that thing happened to me all the time too, where I was put into, it's like, what? I'm going to go be a spy in the house of love. It's like, okay, you picked the wrong person, but here I go, and it's that feeling from childhood of like, you're in the middle of all these adult complications and you don't understand them. Yeah. And so that's definitely, that's me too.
Yeah. Well, did you handle the unfortunate hair incidents as well as Ferris? Because I thought she took it in stride and I could have learned from her way back when.
Yeah, no, she did much better than I did. And, and in a weird way, having Pinky as your younger sister, just like, who is like kind of like the opposite of Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, it's just like everything gets worked out right away because of Pinky. Like, do you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
all right there.
Yes.
So Pinky hastens the process of Ferris saying, "There's nothing I can do. I got bigger
Yes.
things I got to worry about." Yeah.
Pinky definitely is a delightful presence in this book. And I could, as a mom now reading it, I thought, oh no, I could so understand where some of those quips from mom are coming from, out of fatigue and frustration with, the craziness, the wonderful craziness that happens to be surrounding their home often.
Right. Pinky is a force of nature. One of those characters that I didn't like happily this happens. I didn't envision her. She showed up. And then it's the rest of the time it's like, don't let Pinky take over the novel because that's what she wanted to do.
Now tell me about the words. Are, you know, as a writer, you love words. As a reader, I love words. And I have a long list of words, as I mentioned, in my notebook that were in here. We've got, just to name a few, enamored, bereft, incalculably, unrepentant, insouciant. I loved how many beautiful, wonderful words that, you know, the literacy teacher in me sees beautifully defined in kid-friendly terms right after. So every kid can access these beautiful words that are just fun to say. How did that element come in?
It, it came, again, this is that thing where I don't know where I'm doing what I'm doing, and I don't plan, and think, okay, this will happen and that will happen. But it all flows from my love of words, and that there's this moment in the book, and I, where Ferris feels this gratitude, to Mrs. Milk, because
Yeah.
she has given her these words, and that gratitude is mine, and it goes for all of language, and it's something that when you have the right word in a moment, like, and bereft is, I think, when Ferris thinks that, and thinks how unusual it is that the word that describes how Mrs. Milk feels was given to her by Mrs. Milk. But to have the right word at the right time is like it's a container. And so it like helps you understand your feeling, but you can hand it to somebody else and say, this is the way I feel. And then they know, which is like a book in miniature. Do you know what I mean? And
Yes.
so it's just like it is this wonderfully compact thing that contains, you can put your soul in and hand to somebody else and say, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, I get it because of this word.
And those words, again, to loop back to what I talked about in the beginning, that is the way that you connect with that character, from character to the reader and back and forth, that just makes everything, I don't want to say melt away because it's all so important, but that's why it just feels like the here and now, regardless of when the book was written, because we may not use those words as often, but we feel them. We know what they feel like. And I felt like they just made it so much easier to love this character and to know what she was feeling on such a deep, deep, deep level.
That's a wonderful insight from you. That I'm, I always, it's just, I take something each time I talk to a reader who gives me an insight, and then I can use it to talk about. It's like duly noted. Okay, yeah. Those words, if I understood what you just said, those words of Ferris's help us connect to Ferris too, right?
Yes.
And to the story. So yeah, that's that's a beautiful insight.
Yeah. Well, you did it. So one more piece that really stood out to me, and I think it's because I'm working really hard lately to calm myself down, like to be that zen, to be that meditation, mindfulness that seems to be everywhere. And I truly loved the parts. And again, I don't want to spoil things for readers, but Ferris does seem to have this ability to go inside herself and rise above whatever chaos
Mm.
is going on and really tune in to what she's feeling, what she's thinking, and kind of get this insight that wouldn't come to her if she was able to do that. And I've got to tell you, I wish I knew that such a place existed as a kid, that this was a thing. This was something people could try to access to just pretend you're not there and
Mm.
see what
Right.
happens when
Yeah.
you do. Such a powerful piece of the book for me. I know it would have been if I were reading as a child, but as an adult working on that kind of thing, that just went right home for me.
Yeah, and again, this is something that in all the interviews I've done about this book, I haven't talked about that with anybody. And and it's a really moving moment for me. And we won't get into spoilers, but you know, it's oddly Glenn the exterminator who gives her the instructions for how to be there in that moment. And it is um, something that I knew how to do instinctually as a child, and now something that I have to more consciously access as an adult. And it was interesting for me to write that scene and to remember the body feelings of all of that as a kid, and to think, oh, that is still accessible
Yeah.
to me, you know, which goes to your meditation point. And uh it's really great to talk about that, because I haven't talked about that with anybody, and it is one of my favorite scenes in the book.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
And
I, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and it makes me think, I wonder if Ferris is a writer, you know, because it's part of that where you like, you step back and step out,
Yeah.
and you're just an observer, and it brings that calm, and it brings a clarity of vision too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine in my mind, she is those love of words, the ability to do that. I would imagine that is a good choice for Ferris. But I'm so glad you said that her ability to access that actually came from the exterminator. Because
Yeah.
one of the things I thought of as I read was, sometimes the things we need come from the most unlikely of places.
Yes,
And
right.
that's an unlikely place.
Right, it is. And I was, you know, one, I hesitated because of spoilers, but I also hesitated because it sounds so outrageous. Glenn the exterminator, who, let's just face it, is a lovely human being. He is very dear to Ferris, and you know, Boomer falls in love with him. The dog falls in love with him. But it's just like, he is the most gentle of people, and he gives her this huge piece of wisdom. In a kind of like just a sideways way, you know? Yeah.
So you mentioned, that you didn't know something that was coming in the book, or that like it maybe revealed itself. How does that process work for you? Is it one idea that kind of like Ferris, you just let the vision come and it does what it needs to do? How do you go from that idea to what ultimately ends up in readers' hands?
Yeah. So, you know, in this book, for this book in particular, you know, I can trace the origin of it, which was my best friend, the birth of her granddaughter, and all of the pictures coming in, the day of her birth, with this child surrounded by, here are her parents, here are her two sets of grandparents, and just this kind of like gobstopped by the notion that this child was just loved from the second that she arrived. And for various and assorted reasons, it really resonated with me right then. And I thought, what if I wrote a book where the kid knew absolutely, positively, you know, because that's a little bit different for me. And so
Mhm.
I entered into it with this notion of a full family, and a child who has never doubted that how loved they are in the world. And that was it. I envisioned a something, a house filled with love,
Mhm.
and a child loved from the moment they appeared. Um, and I sat down, and and bit by bit, okay, here's Ferris. Okay, why is she called Ferris? Oh, okay. Because you know, she was born on the fairgrounds below. You know, it's just, and it's like bit by bit, it's all revealed. And like I said, Pinky shows up, and it's like, what this agent of chaos? But that's really fun. And the grandmother, Charisse,
Oh,
who is the one who caught Ferris when she arrived, and there's this profound love between my best friend and this granddaughter, and so that, you know, is part of it too. And then but I don't have any plot idea. I don't envision envision Glenn the Exterminator showing up at any point. I don't, it's just like I discover it
Yeah.
as I'm discovering the characters, and I think, and I could go back and look at the very first draft of this, but I think, everybody kind of showed up in that first paragraph, without me even knowing them. Uncle Ted moved in back into the basement to paint a history of the world. It's like, what? And so it was just there, and then bit by bit I followed them through
Wow.
it, and never truly wanted to leave. Though I felt safe and loved in that house too. So
I didn't want it to end either. I didn't want to turn that last page because it was so beautiful.
well, you are very dear to say that. I didn't want to leave either. So, but there's always another story waiting to be told.
Right. Which is, the thing that we all hold on to. When we turn that last page, we know that means that another one could likely be on the horizon. Do you write every day? Do you have a particular writing routine? I am a notebooker and I
Yeah,
notebook all the
I'm
time,
a
but
notebook.
I wondered,
Yeah, so I tend to be, you could call it a routine, or you could call it like, what my friends call it, super rigid. But I came late to writing after talking about it for so long, and by the time I started to do it, it was just so clear that it wasn't going to get done unless I figured out a way to
yeah,
stick to a pattern. So I write 2 pages most days, and I move relatively slowly. And notebooks, I I would be lost without a notebook. So I journal in the morning, and then I have a notebook that I kind of carry with me throughout the day, and that I use in the afternoon to kind of like think about what I've done and to write down what I've heard and seen, or and so, and the notebooks, you know, I
I
love
do.
the notebooks. It's just like they're just all possibility, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, they
and
are. And they wait patiently and they don't judge and they just let you get whatever you need to get out. Do you have a favorite notebook, a favorite kind, a particularness around your notebook?
oh, my one of my best friends lives across the street, and she and I are like, we'll go over to this art supply store here in the Twin Cities, and just like stand in the notebook section. And we think, wow, we must sound absolutely out of our minds as we talk about them. So yes, I do. I use a moleskin, in the hardback moleskin in the morning, because that's what I use and have used for a long time. And then the afternoon book now is like, maybe you can say it, I can't. Lickstrom, liquor,
I can't, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
and I love that because of the numbered pages, and being able to index things, and table of contents things. It's really, I can
Yeah.
find when I have a particular thought about a story, now I can find it. And so it's taken me a long time to like fall under the spell of that, but I'm totally under the spell of that now. Yeah.
Yeah. I am a fellow Moleskin morning writer.
Are
I,
you really
I
hardback?
love them. Well, actually, no, mine is softback because I have this cover that I was given for a birthday present once. So I just replace it. So the cover is always my kind of my morning notebook will always look that way. And I
Yeah.
just keep replacing them. And then um, I don't really have a particular kind for kind of my other kind of writing. It's just usually needs to have light lines and the pencils just got to glide just so.
Oh, pencil, huh? Yeah, no, this is something else my friend and I talk about all the time, and it's not pencil for me. But I want to say one other notebook thing. Well, because there's again, which, however you say, they have a 5 year. Have you done the 5 year book?
I do, not theirs, but I do have a 5-year journal. Yes.
That to me has been relatively revelatory. It's just like, because I thought I don't need another notebook. why am I doing this? But just to see
Me
it
too.
like year by year,
Yeah.
has been really, really helpful. And I keep track of what I'm working on in there. So that also
Oh,
is
yeah.
very helpful. So,
Yeah. I love mine. I write in it every morning about the day before.
yep, that's what I do
You
too.
know, yeah, and just the little things that you think you'll remember, but
Hmm.
you don't, and you get this chance to look back at them and just feel, I only try to keep track of the good things, those fun little tiny things that happen. It is it's such a wonderful practice. Once you're in the habit, you do reap the rewards again and again and again
Absolutely, you
as you
do.
look back.
And people are kind of like, what do I, and it's like, no, really. And it takes a while until you see what it gives you, but it gives you a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So were there ideas from Ferris or maybe, your newest one coming up, Oris and Timble, which we can sneak peek into too, are pieces of those all throughout your notebook? Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And all three notebooks. So the 5 year and in the morning pages one and in the afternoon one. And so which is the great thing about being able to index now because I use that one, the afternoon one, to like find all of those
yeah.
references. Yeah. So yep, all scattered throughout. And it's fun when they pop up the next year. It's like, oh, that's what I was working on, or that's when I thought of that, or yeah.
Do you loop back to those ideas? Do you find that they kind of find themselves in present day projects if you are reminded of them?
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they will sit for a long time. It's a list that I transfer from notebook to notebook, and I have a word or a little snippet of something that it's like I think that's a story, and it won't show up until years later. It will show up on. It's like whoops, like I didn't even intend to put that in here, and then I
Yeah.
can cross it off the list. So.
Yeah. I got a chance to see you in person years ago. My daughter was young. You were in Saratoga Springs, New York,
Oh,
if you
oh,
remember any of the places you come. And I
I
remember you
always
talk.
remember Saratoga Springs. Yeah,
It's
it's like,
beautiful, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I love Northshire Bookstore. And I remember I still have the note in my phone that my daughter and I were passing back and forth, taking notes, of things you were saying of, in order to write, you've got to write. Start writing stuff down, starts collecting things, start eavesdropping and listening to people, and then read and
yeah.
keep reading and then write again. And it was such beautiful advice and such a neat moment as we were literally passing the phone back and forth,
Oh,
keep track of what you were saying.
mother and daughter writers, and it's so it's always the same advice I give, and it's disturbing, vague in a way, because but it's so straightforward. Is this
Yeah,
is what it is? It's like it is reading, writing, rewriting, paying attention,
yeah.
not giving up. You know.
Yes, and that was the piece. I'm sure she took away things as a young girl in the audience, but the mom in me who loves stories heard you say, "I didn't do this right away. I
Mm.
thought about it for a really long time and then I did it, but I did it." And that was the inspiring piece to me because I think people who love books and stories, we all have a story inside of ourselves. It's just, do we tell it? Do we let ourselves think we can tell it? And so
Right.
you may think your advice is vague, but I think it's so accessible for anyone who might want to do that work to feel like, oh, I do have that story in me.
Yeah,
Kate, so
and I think that, I this is like, and maybe I talked about it that night. I can see that room. I remember that room where we
yep.
it's a big room and there were a lot of y'all and it was great to be there. It was very I've done that room twice for Northshire and it's
Yes, I was
always
there twice.
yeah. um but it's that thing of like I think we all suffer from this, adults, kids, this kind of notion of you know if you're supposed to do it, then when you sit down to do it, it's going to come out right. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm not a writer because this is a mess. And it's just like, that is just not it. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not it at all. It's like, this is that. that thing of like, I'm always stuck on the notion of this is a for human beings. And so we're human beings
Yeah.
doing it's magical work, but it's work, and we're human beings, and we have to work and work and work at it, you know.
Yeah. Lauren Castillo was on the podcast not too long ago, and I made the comment of how, I'm a terrible artist and I can only draw stick people. And she said, people who say that, it's just because you stopped drawing. If you kept drawing, so long ago, you would have gotten better, just like I did, just like anybody who wants to do something who doesn't give up.
Right. Well, that's
I love
beautiful, because it's that what's that quote about the kid who said to her art professor father, like, what's your job? And he said, I teach people how to draw. And the 6-year-old said, you mean they forget?
that.
And it's that, we forget.
Yes.
We forget to let ourselves play. We forget. And also it goes to that point, which I love to make, about how and I was just in the car with an artist on the way back from a festival, and he and I were talking about this he says this when he talks to kids too. It's just like that every workshop that I've sat in for writing, and he said it was the same for him with painting, the person to the left or the right of me, I can tell you there was more talent there, but did they want it as much as I did? And were they willing to do the work, and were they willing to make the compromises? And so it's just like, talent isn't the thing, it's wanting to do it, which goes to Lauren's point. If you want to keep drawing, you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you keep writing, which is wonderful.
Yeah, and I feel so lucky to get to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so do we as readers. I would love for you to, because the timing of this episode, your latest book, even though currently at recording it's Ferris, but you have a new one coming out for a little younger. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's for all audiences, but I would say a younger audience. There's beautiful, beautiful illustrations in this that bring it to life. Do you want to say a little bit about Orris and Timble, since it'll have just been put in the world?
Yeah, Orris and Timble. Orris is a rat, Timble's an owl. And they form what can only be called an unlikely friendship. And it was so much fun to, like, I love having a frame for something, and these are very short. And it was during the pandemic when I started, and I started consciously with, like, I need this to comfort myself. I need something frog and toad like. And I know how daring it is to even mention frog and toad, which is the holy grail of this, easy reader kind of thing. But I needed that, as, again, that kid in me. And so that's where I started, was I want to do something that feels like that to me, that will comfort me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's such a beautiful, I'd say, testament to that unlikely friendship, but just to the beauty and the possibility of stories to connect us together in those
yeah,
unlikely friendships, in those unlikely ways.
a beautiful point, which I will use when I talk about a person temple.
Please do. That makes me so happy to know about that. Well, I am just so grateful, so honored that you have come on to the podcast to chat with me, and that I have selfishly made it exactly what I wanted to ask you and
I
wanted to talk
super,
about.
super, super enjoyed it. I'm so grateful. It was just a really, really good conversation, and I'm so grateful for it.
Oh, well, thank you. In Ferris, just to kind of end, you have this beautiful line that you've written. It is coming from a character. It's something one of the characters is saying, but in it you write about magic. And you say, magic, if you ask me, is mostly about believing in yourself so much that you make other people believe in you too. And Kate, that is what you do for us. That is what you do for every reader, everywhere, child or adult. You make us see the magic. And I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for all that you put into the world. You will have a fan for life.
It's good that it's just my voice and not my face on this, because thank you. It makes me cry. And I'm the lucky one to get to connect with all of those readers and to feel that bond, So thank you.
Oh, you are welcome. From my reading heart to yours, as we started out with. Thank you, and listeners, thank you so much for listening to the Kid Lit Love podcast. And I'll see you inside the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of Kid Lit Love. Thanks for listening.